Good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Stiles, and I am so honored to be here to give this opening keynote at the inaugural summit of the Autoimmune Association. I'm going to just share my slides quickly. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited about this conference. Dysautonomia International is a nonprofit that I run, and we've been part of the Autoimmune Association's National Coalition of Autoimmune Patient Groups for many years, and we really appreciate the work they do. So it's a great honor to be asked to give this opening keynote. So I was asked to talk about my story as how I evolved from kind of a scared, newly diagnosed, confused patient into someone who is a leader in my patient community. So that's what I'm going to do. Like many people with an autoimmune disease, I was healthy before I got sick, and I had a busy, sort of active life. Everything seemed to be going well. I was an attorney. I was really athletic. I had traveled a lot. And then all of that changed overnight. I had an acute onset of symptoms after a snowboarding concussion. And if you get a snowboarding or any kind of concussion, you don't sort of envision that this is going to set off a lifelong chronic autoimmune disease. So I thought, I got a bad concussion and I will be back in action in a week or two or a month or two. But unfortunately for me, that was not the case. I had a lot of symptoms that weren't explained by standard concussion symptoms. And so I was bouncing around to a lot of doctors for about 2 years. I was totally bedridden. My GI tract had stopped working. I just had so much going on at once. And I call this my misdiagnosis misadventures, which I'm sure a lot of people with autoimmune diseases can relate to, because so many of us go through long periods of misdiagnosis. So I had doctors telling me all sorts of weird things that just didn't add up. And I was offered a turkey sandwich one time to treat my concussive symptoms. Just in case you didn't know, turkey is delicious, but it is not a concussion treatment. I also experienced a lot of doctors saying things like, I don't want to hear about your fainting symptoms. I'm a pulmonologist. And this kind of embodied what was, what's wrong with the medical system for autoimmune patients, because we tend to have systemic symptoms, at least some of us, affecting a lot of different organs and systems. And we need doctors who can look at the big picture, not just the organ that they specialize in. I started going to so many doctors that were not figuring out what I had that I started to wonder if there was like a course in medical school where they taught doctors how to blame patients, because I had all sorts of doctors telling me things that were sort of putting, the burden on me, like, well, you must be doing this, or you must want these symptoms, or, things like that. And before I had this concussion, my interaction with the medical community was always good. I had an infection. I'd go to the doctor, they would diagnose it. I'd get an antibiotic, I would get better, and that would be in the end of it. And there was no sort of, I didn't really have an understanding of what happens when you have a chronic illness or complicated illness that the medical system isn't really set up to sort of figure out quickly and get you 100% back to better. So I did have one doctor tell me, you're deconditioned because lawyers sit at their desks all day. And I thought that was really funny, because I was super athletic beforehand. This is me in the weeks and months before my concussion. The trapeze class that I did was just about a week before I got sick. So that wasn't true. And this kind of ongoing, constant sort of not helpful advice I was getting from doctors was not good. And I actually got misdiagnosed with neuroendocrine cancer, which is kind of a weird twist in my story. And I started really questioning these doctors, and these were not like bad doctors. I was going to the top academic medical centers in New York City, to like the senior tenured professors of whatever field they were in. And I kept saying, I started questioning, and I think that's part of the evolution of becoming an empowered patient, feeling comfortable enough to question what doctors are telling you in a respectful way, not in a sort of aggressive, kind of mean-spirited way, but asking questions about things that just didn't add up or didn't make sense to me, or things I wanted to know about what was going on with my body. So one of the questions I asked was, how would a concussion set off neuroendocrine cancer? That doesn't really make sense, right? I didn't go to medical school, but I'm pretty sure cancer doesn't get triggered by a concussion. And I had this one doctor who's very senior, very respected physician and researcher. And he said, stop asking questions. I went to Harvard. I know what I'm doing. And that really stuck with me. He wasn't a bad guy. Maybe I just caught him on a bad day when he said that. But that stuck with me as like everything that was wrong with medicine, like that the idea that the patient doesn't know anything, and because the doctor has a fancy degree, that they know everything. And I think that it's somewhere in the middle. I think that patients are a great source of knowledge about what's going on in their body and their disease, whether they have a diagnosis or not. I was also told, don't go on the internet, you'll scare yourself. And that's kind of a, patronizing point of view. It's not 1940. We don't treat people like this anymore. We actually help people learn about their disease. And the trick is to using the internet in a helpful way, not finding every kind of scare story that you hear about your disease, but finding good medical journal articles and good resources and the credible nonprofits that are working on your disease. So in my case, Dr. Google was actually more helpful than Dr. Harvard, who had misdiagnosed me with cancer. I figured out that the reflux drugs they were giving me at the hospital could cause a false positive on the blood test that had confirmed the cancer. And I figured out that bananas, which they were giving me a lot of in the hospital, could cause a false positive on the urine test. And I found this in medical journal articles that I pulled up while I was laying in my hospital bed for 2 months. And so I asked to go off the bananas and the reflux drugs and get retested. Seemed like a logical thing to do to make sure I didn't actually have cancer, as I suspected I didn't. And I was denied. I was told, no, you've had $1 million workup already, which was true because they thought I had cancer and they were doing all sorts of tests to find it. And at that moment, I think that's when I became the empowered patient, and maybe not in the best way, but I realized I was literally fighting for my life. Either I had cancer or I didn't, and I needed to know. So I became one of those sort of obnoxious patients who like demanded, to be tested for a certain thing. And I know doctors don't like dealing with patients when they become kind of belligerent, but I had to at that time, in that moment, I had to become that belligerent patient that demanded testing. And sure enough, I was right, or Google was right. When I got retested, it turns out I didn't have cancer. So great, thank goodness, that's great. What do I really have? So this was the standard, this is not my actual doctor, but this is the standard response I got when I asked, okay, it's not cancer, what is it? We don't know. So I just figured like if I'm at this great academic medical center in New York City and I have all these really senior smart doctors working on this case and they can't figure me out, I'm gonna have to figure things out myself. So I really started to dig into reading medical literature, Googling my symptoms in not just Google, but actually like pubmed.gov, which I think is a website all patients should get familiar with. It's the largest repository of medical journal articles in the world. And quite often you can read the articles for free. Sometimes they're behind a paywall and you can only see the abstract. But in my symptom searching on pubmed.gov, I ended up finding Mayo Clinic journal articles and the website from the Vanderbilt University Autonomic Dysfunction Center, which led me to believe that I had this thing called POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. And it's a relatively common autonomic nervous system disorder. So of course, my doctors, when I gave them this info, I was still in the hospital with the cancer misdiagnosis. And they said, don't go on the internet, and I said, come on, you guys, you misdiagnosed me with cancer. The least you could do is read Mayo Clinic journal proceedings for me and tell me if this is what I have. So they did. And they came in the next morning to my hospital room. And after we did a little bit of testing, they were like, yes, you have POTS. I say, okay, great. So Google isn't all bad. Sometimes you can actually find helpful info, so just a brief talk on what POTS is. Many people have probably never heard of it. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's a really common autonomic nervous system disorder. It's grossly underdiagnosed and underrecognized because most doctors have not received training on how to diagnose and treat autonomic nervous system disorders. It's largely female predominant. About 85% of patients are female. 1 to 3 million Americans, which, it's not rare. That's on par with things like Sjogren's or MS or Parkinson's, things that are not considered rare diseases. The peak age of onset is in adolescence, but about half of patients develop it in adulthood. patients go through very long diagnostic delays, like a lot of autoimmune conditions. And there's a high rate of autoimmune comorbidity in POTS. We see a lot of Sjogren's and Hashimoto's, celiac, antiphospholipid syndrome, and a large assortment of other autoimmune conditions that overlap with POTS. And so there's actually some research going on suggesting that POTS itself might be an autoimmune disease, but we're not quite ready to say that. It's not written in stone yet that it's an autoimmune disease. It's sort of the way I think of where we are in POTS research right now is like sort of what was it like to have lupus before we knew that lupus was an autoimmune disease and before we had the biomarkers to help diagnose it. So that's kind of where POTS patients are right now. Some of it might end up not being autoimmune, but there's a lot of evidence pointing in that direction right now. POTS has objective diagnostic criteria. We put people on a tilt table test. It sounds a little torturous. It isn't the most pleasant test, but it's actually really important to help diagnose POTS. Sometimes people with POTS, if you can't get a tilt test, your doctor can measure heart rate and blood pressure at the bedside, laying down and standing up. So I'm not trying to give a whole talk on POTS here, but I just wanted to let people know there are objective criteria, and you can always visit the Dysautonomia International website if you want to learn more about POTS. I also want to mention there's actually a lot of other autonomic nervous system disorders that do overlap with autoimmune conditions. So if you're very lightheaded frequently, if you have low blood pressure, if you have tachycardia, GI dysmotility, these are all things that are regulated by the autonomic nervous system. So it might be worth talking to your doctor. Sometimes when we treat an autoimmune disease, we're very focused on the specific, the common symptoms of the autoimmune disease. But a lot of autoimmune diseases also come with autonomic dysfunction, which can be treated in a different way. So these are, this photo is a snapshot from a video we made on POTS when we asked patients, what are all the things that POTS has come with for them? And it's, it's just a long list of symptoms that are sort of generic and seen in a lot of chronic illness conditions. And it really is the whole body. And the reason POTS impacts the whole body is because the autonomic nervous system impacts the whole body, regulates all of your bodily functions that you don't have to think about, like your heart rate and your blood pressure, your GI motility, your gallbladder function, your salivary glands, your thyroid glands, even your immune system is regulated in large part by your autonomic nervous system. So if you have a problem with your autonomic nervous system, you can get symptoms in a lot of different parts of your body. So in my case, I ended up with this very long list of diagnoses, some of which are pretty serious, that were beyond POTS. I had POTS and I did meet the criteria, but I had a lot of other stuff getting diagnosed. And it just seemed weird to me that I was this very healthy person before this concussion. And then all of this stuff started happening to me. It was like a snowball effect of one diagnosis after another. And I knew in my gut, my gut instinct, even though I didn't have a medical degree, was that some kind of overall condition, one, disease got set off by this concussion and was causing a lot of these problems. And so it turns out that my gut instinct was right. It took a long time to find a doctor who knew how to figure this out for me. I met an autonomic neurologist, Kamal Shamali, and there are not a lot of autonomic neurologists in the world. There's only maybe about 100 in the US, or fewer actually. And he figured out that I had Sjogren's syndrome, which is a systemic autoimmune disease, which I'm sure if you know about autoimmunity, you've probably heard of Sjogren's before. Sjogren's is typically known as like a dry eyes and dry mouth disease, but Sjogren's can actually impact every tissue and every organ in the body in some patients. So it's not always presenting the same in every patient, just like a lot of other autoimmune diseases where there's sort of a variability within the patient population. Turns out Sjogren's is the second most common cause of autonomic neuropathies, which is why it gave me POTS, because it messed up my autonomic nervous system. Previously, doctors had told me they ruled out Sjogren's because they did blood tests, and my blood tests were negative. So it turns out the Sjogren's blood tests, which are commonly the SSA and SSB antibodies, are actually negative in about 40% of Sjogren's patients. So there is another test done called the minor salivary gland biopsy that can help diagnose these seronegative Sjogren's patients. And it's pretty hard to get a doctor who knows that and who is willing to order the minor salivary gland biopsy, which is also sometimes called a lip biopsy. But in any event, My autonomic neurologist knew this and ordered the right tests, and sure enough, that's what it was. I had Sjogren's. This was Sjogren's was a part of the what is it called? Wheel of Fortune game, and Venus Williams was the clue, because Venus Williams is probably one of the most famous people that has Sjogren's. So I'm a bit of a sort of physics nerd from my undergrad days, and I kept thinking that there was this underlying thing that was unifying all of that crazy long list of symptoms that not just symptoms, but diagnoses that I had, neurological and cardiac and kidney. And a lot of you, I'm sure, who have more systemic autoimmune diseases can relate to this, because you can get problems in different organ systems, and it doesn't, if you don't know that you have an autoimmune disease, it can feel like you're falling apart, right? So in my case, the sort of unified theory was that Sjogren's was causing almost all of this. And it was almost reassuring to know that I didn't actually have 40 different medical problems. I had one that was causing all of these systemic effects. So I really am super lucky that I found this autonomic neurologist who put me on IVIG, because my Sjogren's was doing a lot of nerve damage, and it helped me dramatically. And I know that doesn't happen for everyone, and I don't want to sort of promote it as like it's a cure, but for me, high dose immunoglobulin was highly effective. It took me from bedridden to ice skating after 3 infusions. My small fiber nerves actually grew back, which is pretty amazing. And eventually I switched to subcutaneous immunoglobulin. For any of you autoimmune patients who are on high dose IVIG, I would strongly encourage you to talk to your doctors about trying high dose subcutaneous immunoglobulin, especially if the IVIG gives you like headaches and side effects. This is a newer concept in treating, autoimmunity with subcutaneous. Subcutaneous used to only be used for immune deficiency diseases in lower doses, but now we know that we can also use it for certain autoimmune conditions. I also did vagus nerve stimulation, which is not sort of standard clinical care for Sjogren's or POTS, but I had read a lot of research on it that was going on in various autoimmune diseases. And because I had an autoimmune disease and an autonomic nervous system disorder, it seemed to make sense to me. This is something I should try. So I read up a lot of papers on it, and I confirmed with my doctors, that this was okay to do this. I was sort of dosing it properly, and it definitely seemed to help me a lot. I also do all the standard lifestyle stuff that everybody with a chronic autoimmune condition is told to do. Eat an anti-inflammatory diet, make sure you get regular exercise, try to get good sleep, manage your stress, and all of that stuff. When I was really, really, really sick, I would get super annoyed at people when they would tell me like, why don't you just try kale smoothies and yoga, and because I knew that those things weren't enough to sort of cure whatever I had going on. But now, as I've sort of become a more experienced patient, I recognize that those kinds of things play a role. They're not the magical fix, but I view it as a way to get my body as healthy as possible, so that whatever Sjogren's is going to do to me is at least attacking the healthiest body it can, instead of being sort of having poor nutrition or no exercise and stuff like that. And I know it's not easy to do these lifestyle things when you're trying to manage a chronic illness, but I think they're super important. I also had to learn to cope with what I couldn't fix with medication or lifestyle treatments, which I think a lot of us have to deal with. There's just certain things that are just not fixable right at this time with the current treatments we have. So you have to sort of build up some resilience and figure out how you're going to deal with that hard to treat stuff. I would say luck played a role, and definitely in my case, privilege. I'm a sort of upper middle class, well-educated white woman from a big city who could go to any medical center I wanted to for treatment. And I had good insurance. And there's a lot of people in the autoimmune world and in the broader community who don't have those kind of privileges. And I think as patient advocates, we should be thinking about, how do we help more people get access to the best doctors, to getting diagnosed even. And that's something that I try to work on. And so if I had just gone through this myself, this kind of crummy diagnostic delay and sort of mistreatment and getting blown off by doctors, I probably just could have gotten over it. I got diagnosed, I got a lot better, not totally better, but a lot better. And I could just go back to my life as being an attorney and get on with it. But along this journey, I met thousands of other POTS patients online who had very similar stories to me, or almost worse, often worse diagnostic delay and mistreatment and inability to get care. So I was really angry about that, if I'm being honest. I was so angry. But I knew that if I just let that anger fester, it would have maybe, made me sicker and not a happy person. So I was like, how do I channel this anger into something positive that maybe can help some other people? So I joined together with some like-minded patients, caregivers, and doctors, and we launched Dysautonomia International in October 2012. We started at my kitchen table, and we have grown to a community of about over 100,000 members. And we're growing, unfortunately, fast right now because long COVID patients, people who've had a COVID viral infection, are developing a post-viral dysautonomia at an alarming rate. So this is an unfortunate way that our community is growing. We have support groups in all 50 states and 6 countries. We've raised millions of dollars for research. We're doing physician education courses to train doctors how to recognize POTS and other autonomic disorders so that patients will get diagnosed faster and have a much more enjoyable diagnostic journey than a lot of us have already, have faced so far. And also helping doctors know that there are treatments. Maybe not, we don't have any great cures for autonomic disorders right now, but there are treatments that can help minimize symptoms for most patients. And we want doctors to know about these treatments so that people don't have to suffer for no reason. We also host an annual conference similar to this, or we've had in person, but during COVID, we've done virtual. And our last conference had 9,800 participants, which is just amazing. When I was first diagnosed with POTS, the neurologist actually told me, you're never going to meet another patient that has this, and you're never going to meet a doctor who knows how to treat this. So I think I took it as a personal challenge to meet every POTS patient and every POTS researcher and clinician I could find. So right now, October is Dysautonomia Awareness Month, which is something we initiated in 2012. And our patient and caregiver volunteers organize events and awareness activities in hundreds of cities around the world each October. We've done lobby days on Capitol Hill to sort of influence congressional policy and try to create policies that benefit our patient community. And we also engage with the agencies that do healthcare related policies like NIH, FDA, CDC, et cetera. So we were funding all this research, which felt great to sort of be making some progress, but it feels too slow. And I'm sure any of you who've been living with an autoimmune disease, there's research happening on your disease, but it's just not fast enough because you want to feel better now, not 10 years from now. So I started suggesting research ideas to the various experts in this field and say, hey, would you do a study on this if you had some help? And, what if we did this? Can we do this? And so, to my surprise, they thought these were good ideas and started inviting me to co-author research with them. And in the beginning, it was a novelty that someone lets a lawyer publish in a medical journal. That doesn't happen every day. So, but I started to realize that I could actually have a helpful benefit, a beneficial effect on my field in autonomic disorders, and particularly in POTS. So I started taking it a little more seriously and really thinking about what kind of research our community actually needs to have done. And then to my shock, my local medical school, Stony Brook University School of Medicine, asked me if I wanted to join their faculty as a research assistant professor of neurology. It was completely shocking to be asked because I don't have an MD or a PhD, I'm a lawyer, but I took it, if an opportunity knocks, you got to answer the door. So I said, yes, I would love to do that. And this gave me the opportunity to do my own research, not just to collaborate with other existing researchers in the field, but to sort of, pave my own path. And so I'm doing right now what I think seems to be the largest, the most in-depth immune system research study ever done in POTS. I didn't want to do a sort of easy study for my first project. I said I want to dig in and find the immune markers that are. We know that POTS comes with a lot of different autoantibodies and other various immune markers that are out of balance, and we're just at the sort of early stages of figuring that out. So just in a big picture, I think transitioning from bedridden patient to professor maybe doesn't happen every day, but I think that there's a lot of lessons in my story that are relevant to other people. You can make a difference in your own care and your own disease as in your field by teaming up with other people. I think there's a lot of awesome research happening in autoimmunity, and we're starting to see more of the idea of autoimmunology as like its own field. How great would it be to just go to one center that can handle all of your autoimmune stuff and not have to go to like 15 different specialists for all your different complications? I think that there are autoimmune treatments that are coming up that are going to be treatments that are going to work in a broad range of autoimmune conditions as we get a better understanding of the immune system. I think vagus nerve stimulation in particular is going to be really big. There's already studies showing efficacy in Crohn's disease and rheumatoid arthritis and somewhat in Sjogren's. And I think you're going to keep seeing that research expand. I'm hoping that that translates to use in clinical care sooner than later, because it's a relatively benign treatment that is not, like biologics or other types of things that are really potent, sort of somewhat dangerous things. I think we also are going to see advancements in testing where we are able to take a sort of broad immunological fingerprint of people with just some simple testing rather than having to test, 45 different blood tests for 45 different immune markers. And I think to make this happen, that collaboration amongst the researchers and the patient organizations is key. And the Autoimmune Association does a great job of bringing the different patient organizations together and the research community. So here are my sort of quick lessons from a decade of chronic illness. And I'm sure a lot of you who have been dealing with an autoimmune disease for a long time have your own list like this. Trust your gut, even if your GI tract isn't working the way it's supposed to. Trust your gut instincts because you know your body better than anyone, and advocate for yourself when you feel like something isn't right. Google can be a powerful educational resource if you use it correctly. Definitely, check out pubmed.gov, visit the websites for your relevant autoimmune diseases. If there is no nonprofit that focuses on your autoimmune disease, talk to the Autoimmune Association or NORD about how you could set one up, find the researchers in your field, find other patients, because having an organization that focuses on your disease is really, really powerful in terms of getting more research done and supporting your patient community. Speak up for yourself respectfully, but firmly if you have to. Seek out clinicians who want to be your partner in decision-making. Sometimes having a local doctor who's really willing to work and learn with you can be more valuable than having the top expert at the top academic medical center who you might only see once or twice. Be patient with yourself and your body. You might have plans to go to the beach today and have margaritas, but your body might say, nope, not today. We're not doing this. Don't get mad at yourself when that happens. It's just part of living with a chronic autoimmune disease. You're more than your disease. I think it's really important to remember that, especially when you're really sick. It can feel like your disease is just overwhelming your life, but try to find something that is outside of the sick life, whether it's a hobby or your faith or your family, or just something that is something to focus on other than dealing with really debilitating symptoms all day. Which you might be debilitated, dealing with, but have some other thing to focus on as well. I think laughter is the best medicine, even better than IVIG. If I couldn't laugh at myself and all of the crazy things that have happened to my life since I got this autoimmune disease, I don't know where I'd be. Dory, just keep swimming, I think is a popular theme in the chronic illness community. Sometimes the waves are going to wash you backwards. Sometimes you're going to make some progress, and sometimes you're just going to tread water, but you just got to keep swimming and keep trying to live your, not to sound like Oprah, but live your best life. And I think the most valuable thing is find your tribe, find the other people who are living with your autoimmune disease to share your experiences and your expertise with each other, help find the best doctors that you can. And I think when we put patients together, like the Autoimmune Association and many of the nonprofits that are part of it do, we can really have a better chance at fighting our autoimmune diseases when we pool our resources and efforts. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Here are some links if you want to check out Dysautonomia International, curedys.org. I know that the Autoimmune Association has a great conference. I am excited for this conference and I'm going to be tuning in and hearing what everyone has to say. So thanks again for your time.